All organisms living in an ecosystem, such as the African savanna, require energy and nutrients in order to carry out essential life activities, such as growth, respiration, and reproduction. On the savanna, as in nearly every ecosystem on Earth, sunlight provides the energy that powers life, while nutrients and the other critical building blocks of life, such as carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and water, enter the ecosystem from the non-living environment, the atmosphere, and the earth or sea from which the ecosystem arises. Solar energy continuously bombards the Earth, day after day, year after year, providing an essentially limitless source of energy for the Earth's ecosystems. That energy flows through ecosystems, starting with the plants that convert the light energy to chemical energy via photosynthesis. Energy captured by plants is then transferred to the herbivores that graze on the plants. From there, part of the energy is transferred to predators as they eat the herbivores. Scavengers also obtain part of the energy that flooded into the ecosystem as sunlight as they pick at the remains left by predators. Finally, decomposers, breaking down what's left to the molecular level, obtain the last remaining bits of energy from what started as beams of light. It is fortunate for life on Earth that the flow of energy from the sun is essentially limitless, because as energy flows from plant to decomposer, each organism along the way releases part of the energy they capture as heat to the atmosphere, energy that is forever lost for biological purposes within the ecosystem. Thus, for the flow of energy and for the flow of life itself to continue in an ecosystem, an outside source must constantly be injecting it with new energy. Unlike solar energy, the nutrients essential to life are limited. The Earth only has so much carbon or phosphorus or nitrogen available for living organisms. For example, each year, photosynthesis in plants and other organisms captures approximately 1/7 of the carbon available in the atmosphere. If biological processes, such as cellular respiration, didn't return most of this captured carbon back to the atmosphere, life as we know it on Earth would rapidly end, as there would be no carbon in the atmosphere for plants or other photosynthetic organisms to carry out life processes, such as capturing the energy in sunlight. So in order for life on Earth to continue, nutrients must be constantly recycled by the Earth's ecosystems. Thus, energy flows through ecosystems while nutrients cycle through them. The processes by which energy flows through and nutrients are cycled within an ecosystem play a major role in shaping the complex interactions that occur between populations within the Earth's great living communities. Let's now take a look at how the energy and nutrients crucial to life travel through ecosystems and the interactions their travels generate. "93 million miles away, as the sun fuses hydrogen into helium, tremendous quantities of energy are released in the form of light and other electromagnetic waves. The solar energy reaching the Earth each day is roughly 100 million times greater than the energy released by a nuclear bomb. Upon reaching the Earth, clouds and dust in the atmosphere and the Earth's surface reflect much of this energy back into space. Most of the remaining energy is absorbed as heat by the Earth and atmosphere. After reflection and absorption, about 1% of the solar energy reaching Earth is left to power nearly all life on Earth. Of this 1%, plants and other producers capture less than 3%. Thus, the teeming life on Earth is supported by less than 0.03% of the energy reaching it from the sun. The process that converts this light energy into the chemical energy that powers nearly all ecosystems is photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, pigments such as the chlorophyll contained in plants, cyanobacteria, and other photosynthetic organisms absorb certain wavelengths of light energy and use it to combine carbon dioxide and water into sugar, a compound that stores energy in its chemical bonds. Some of the energy stored in the sugar is used to power other chemical reactions that convert sugars into starches, cellulose, fats, vitamins, pigments, and proteins. Photosynthetic organisms are called autotrophs, or producers, since they produce food not only for themselves, but for nearly all other life as well. The organisms that rely on the high-energy molecules made by autotrophs are called heterotrophs, or consumers. The amount of life or biomass an ecosystem can support is determined by the amount of chemical energy generated by producers. The total energy that photosynthetic organisms make available to other members of the community is called net primary productivity. Net primary productivity can be measured in units of energy, calories, or as the dry weight of organic material per unit area per year. The productivity of an ecosystem is influenced by environmental variables, such as temperature range and the availability of sunlight, water, and nutrients. In the Arctic tundra, for example, temperature and sunlight limit productivity, while in deserts it is water and nutrients that limit productivity. In temperate wetlands and tropical rainforests, where energy and nutrients are abundant, productivity is high. Overall, the primary producers in all the Earth's ecosystems use solar energy and nutrients to produce an impressive 170 billion tons of organic material per year. Ecologists categorize living things according to their role in the flow of energy through an ecosystem. The flow of energy through an ecosystem begins with photosynthetic producers and continues on through several levels of consumers. Each category of organism forms a trophic level. Photosynthetic producers, from marsh grasses to thorny acacia trees, form the first trophic level. Herbivores, from caterpillars and grasshoppers to giraffes and elephants that feed exclusively on producers, are considered primary consumers and form the second trophic level. Spiders, birds, hyenas, lions, and other flesh-eating insectivores and carnivores that feed primarily on herbivores are called secondary consumers and form the third trophic level. Some carnivores, such as eagles and bears, occasionally eat other carnivores or insectivores, and when doing so, they form the fourth trophic level, tertiary consumers. The feeding relationships of an ecosystem are often illustrated by food chains, in which representatives of a trophic level are shown eating a representative of the trophic level below them. In a prairie community, for example, grasses, the major producers, are eaten by grasshoppers, the primary consumers. Grasshoppers, in turn, are eaten by field mice, secondary consumers in the prairie food chain. Field mice are then eaten by rattlesnakes, tertiary consumers on the food chain, and finally, rattlesnakes are eaten by hawks, the quaternary consumers at the top of our hypothetical prairie food chain. But though food chains illustrate the general flow of energy through a community, the relationships they depict are largely simplifications. Rattlesnakes don't just eat mice, and hawks don't just eat rattlesnakes. Both, for example, eat prairie dogs and other members of the prairie community, such as prairie chickens and jackrabbits. The actual feeding relationships within a given community are much more accurately depicted by food webs. However, food webs can rapidly become complicated. For example, bald eagles are secondary consumers when they eat herbivores, like a snowshoe rabbit, tertiary consumers when eating salmon, and secondary, tertiary, or quaternary consumers when eating ptarmigan, depending on whether the ptarmigan has been eating vegetation, herbivorous insects, or insect-eating spiders. Brown bears, which are omnivores, complicate matters even further. Acting as primary consumers when they eat grasses and berries, secondary consumers when eating herbivores like Arctic ground squirrels, and as tertiary and quaternary consumers when they eat salmon and spider-eating ptarmigans, respectively. Though complicated and incomplete, the process of diagramming a food web enables one to begin to understand the complex relationships that exist in living communities. For simplicity's sake, however, some of the most important members of a living community, decomposers and detritivores, often aren't represented on food webs. Decomposers and detritivores are nonetheless critical to the functioning of living communities, as every member of a community upon its death is consumed at least in part by these often unnoticed inhabitants of living communities. Decomposers and detritivores are among the most important strands in actual food webs. By liberating nutrients for reuse, they form a vital link in the nutrient cycles of ecosystems. Decomposers are primarily fungi and bacteria, which digest food outside their bodies, absorb the nutrients they need, and release the remaining nutrients into the soil or water. Most detritivores are small, often unnoticed organisms that live on the refuse of life: molted exoskeletons, fallen leaves, wastes, and dead bodies. Detritivores form an extremely complex network of organisms that include earthworms, nematode worms, millipedes, certain insects, protists, and crustaceans, and even a few large vertebrates such as vultures. These organisms consume dead organic matter, extract some of the energy stored within it, and excrete it in a still further decomposed state. Their excretory products serve as food for other detritus feeders and decomposers until most of the stored energy has been utilized. All dead organisms are reduced to simple molecules, such as carbon dioxide and water, that are returned to the atmosphere, and minerals and organic acids that are returned to the soil. In some ecosystems, such as deciduous forests, more energy passes through the detritus feeders and decomposers than through the primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers combined. If the detritus feeders and decomposers were to disappear suddenly, communities would gradually be smothered by accumulated wastes and dead bodies. The nutrients stored in these bodies would be unavailable, and the soil would become poorer and poorer until plant life could no longer be sustained. As a result, energy would cease to enter the community, and the higher trophic levels dependent on the energy captured by plants would disappear as well. A basic law of thermodynamics states that the use of energy is never completely efficient. Light bulbs, computers, televisions, cars, in fact anything that consumes energy gives off part of that energy as heat. For example, as cars convert the chemical energy stored in gasoline to the energy of movement, approximately 75% of the energy is immediately lost as heat. So too in living systems. As we humans exercise vigorously, the contraction of our muscles produces motion. However, these contractions also produce large amounts of heat, which dissipates into the environment. Once this heat is dissipated into the environment, it is forever lost for biological purposes and represents just one example of the inefficient use of energy that occurs throughout the living world. Just as the use of energy by living organisms is inefficient, so is the transfer of energy from one trophic level to the next. When a primary consumer, such as a caterpillar, feeds on a producer, like a tree or shrub, only a portion of the solar energy originally trapped by the producer is available to the caterpillar. This is because some energy originally captured by the producer was lost to the atmosphere as heat, as it carried out various metabolic processes. Further, some of these metabolic processes involve the building of molecules, such as cellulose, which the caterpillar cannot break down and obtain energy from. Therefore, only a fraction of the energy captured by the producer in the first trophic level is available to the caterpillar in the second trophic level. In turn, part of the energy that is obtained by the caterpillar is released as heat to the environment, or used to power crawling and the gnashing of mouthparts, or to construct the caterpillar's indigestible chitinous exoskeleton. All this energy is unavailable to the bird in the third trophic level that eats the caterpillar. The bird, in turn, uses much of the energy captured from the caterpillar to maintain body temperature, power flight, and build indigestible feathers, beak, and bone, energy unavailable to the eagle at the fourth trophic level that consumes the bird. According to the 10% law derived from studies of a variety of ecosystems, the energy transfer between trophic levels in most ecosystems is roughly 10% efficient. This means that the energy stored in primary consumers, herbivores, is only about 10% of the energy stored in the bodies of producers. The bodies of secondary consumers, in turn, possess roughly 10% of the energy stored in primary consumers. In other words, for every 100 calories of solar energy captured by grass, only about 10 calories are converted into herbivores, and only 1 calorie into carnivores. The unequal distribution of energy between trophic levels in ecosystems is reflected in species populations on the African savanna. Here, one notices that the predominant organisms are plants, which have the most energy available to them because they can trap it directly from sunlight. The most abundant animals are herbivores, feeding on plants, while carnivores, like lions, are relatively rare. The inefficient transfer of energy between trophic levels also has important implications for human food production. The lower the trophic level utilized, the more food energy available to human populations. In other words, far more people can be fed on grain than on the meat produced by grain-fed cattle.